Here's a demand curve. As the quantity of a product increases, the price the consumer is willing to pay decreases. This is because only a few consumers are willing to pay $100 for a taco, while many are willing to pay $1 for one. As the price of something goes up, the quantity demanded by the consumer will go down. Here's a supply curve. Suppliers are only willing to supply a product if they can make money off it. As the price of something goes up, the suppliers are actually willing to sell more. If all of a sudden the price of tacos went to $100, everyone would be making tacos. But then, because everyone is now making tacos, the price of tacos would go down. These two curves, supply and demand, jostle until they reach equilibrium, the price at which consumers are willing to pay and suppliers are willing to sell. This is obviously a very simplified model of the world, but it is a functional one. The demand for oil is inelastic. This means that when the price of oil goes up, the quantity demanded doesn't fall much. This is because everyone drives and not many people are willing to give up driving. You can see here an inelastic demand curve is very steep, meaning as you decrease quantity, there is a precipitous increase in price, and likewise, an increase in price results in not much fall off in quantity demanded. The gross revenue oil producers receive is quantity times price. In this scenario, if the oil producer pumps out 6 million barrels of oil, the price will be $50 a barrel, earning him $300 million. However, if he cuts production to 4 million barrels, the price will rise to $90 a barrel, earning him $360 million. Therefore, the oil producer earns more when he produces less. That is if he's alone. The problem is that he has competition, and no oil-producing nation is big enough to be a price maker. They are all price takers. And if you are a price taker, the best thing you can do is pump out as much oil as possible because you have no control over the price. But if oil companies all get together and agree to limit production, they can jack up the price of oil and earn more money. Why? Because the demand for oil is inelastic. This is what OPEC is, a cartel to get oil-producing countries to limit production, thus raising prices. And prices would be raised so much that it would more than compensate for the fact that less barrels of oil are being sold. It's no coincidence that Bush is taking his sweet time getting Iraqi oil back online, because just a small drop-off in anyone's oil production can dramatically raise oil prices because the demand is inelastic. So Bush invaded Iraq to limit oil production to line the pockets of his oil buddies. That's probably one reason, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is that the fate of the dollar is tied to oil. I'm not going to present any stats on this, but it's well known that the U.S. consistently runs two big deficits, a trade deficit and a budget deficit. First, the trade deficit. Normally, trade deficits work themselves out. When a country like the U.S. runs a trade deficit, it pays for it with inflation. Their currency falls. Another country, let's treat the EU as a country, sees the good exchange rate and buys up a bunch of American goods, running a trade deficit with the U.S. in the process. This raises the dollar back up, and you're back to square one. But that's not happening. And the reason it's not happening is because everyone still wants dollars. And what do countries want dollars for? Do they just love America so much that they want all Americans to be rich and happy? It's not a particularly strong currency. No, the reason is oil. The big oil-producing nations only trade in dollars, starting with Saudi Arabia after the oil embargo. So if a country wants oil, which can really be shortened to if a country, then you have to or had to have plenty of dollars lying around. This means that despite way too big trade deficits the U.S. is running, the dollar was still prized for its ability to get oil. Budget deficits also contribute to inflation in a way that is way too complicated for this video, but a good mental shorthand is that budget deficits have about the same effect as just printing money. This is because when the government runs a deficit, it issues a bond, and this bond pays back more than what the bondholder put in, and that payback has to come from taxes or is just printed. But at any rate, once the bond expires, there will be more dollars floating around than there were before. And of course, any time you increase the money supply without increasing what can be bought, you get inflation. And the main culprit for budget deficits are the big three welfare programs: Medicare/Medicaid, Social Security, and income security. You can look at the federal budget in links here, but in 2007, the Fed spent $527 billion on defense, $673 billion on Medicare/Medicaid, $586 billion on Social Security, $367 billion on income security, which is the welfare checks, welfare proper, and $661 billion on everything else. So welfare takes up the bulk of the budget and is the prime cause of the budget deficits and its resulting inflation. The U.S. is spending too much and running two big trade deficits. We are, as Ron Paul says, living beyond our means. Right before the Iraq invasion, Saddam Hussein began selling oil in euros. And of course, Iran is becoming a big deal now that their oil burst is starting to include euros. If oil-producing countries follow suit, the dollar will no longer be special and will have to compete with other currencies around the world on a level playing field. Once this happens, the true value of the dollar will be revealed. And the dollar will spiral down pretty far, much further than it is now. Recent inflation is peanuts to what's going to happen when the petrodollar collapses. Now, there are two serious ways to deal with the situation. One way is the Bush way, just try to hold on. Invading Iraq did two things. It closed off one avenue for the petro-euro and helped maintain the petrodollar stranglehold. And Iraq is being used to manipulate prices by not rebuilding refining capacity, thus increasing the cost of oil and thus worldwide demand for dollars. The Bush way would involve going to war with every country that starts getting uppity about who they sell their, what currency they use to sell their oil, which is why we have this war on terror. It's a hysteria designed to justify a perpetual war against oil-producing nations. Another way, a more realistic way, is to prepare for the mother of all market corrections. It would involve slowly backing out of the Middle East and freeing up the petrodollar. This is going to result in inflation. Of course, once this is done, there have to be the ways to cushion the blow at home. No more budget deficits, which means cutting defense and welfare and all sorts of stuff like never before, and perhaps tax hikes, although not too much because you need low taxes to sustain a reasonable standard of living and allow companies to form capital in a hyperinflationary economy. This is very close to what Ron Paul advocates. Ron Paul gets it. Obama, on the other hand, would do the absolute worst thing possible, and that is to raise taxes, increase outlays, and back off the petrodollar. In short, with Obama, you would be printing more dollars at the same time you are removing the oil that backs it. This is the absolute worst thing you can do, and of course it's what Cracker School advocates. America would be better off with George Bush III than who would just try to hang on. But we really need Ron Paul. My only concern with Ron Paul is that he would advocate precipitous withdrawals when we really need to back off slowly, facing one inflation bump at a time. Now, what I think is going to happen is that Bush III will be elected, either Hillary Clinton or some Republican like McCain or Romney, so we'll be hanging on for 4 more years. And perhaps in 2012, we'll get Ron Paul or Obama. Either one of them will end the situation. It's just Ron Paul will do it a lot better.